canapes and wine that is suitable for a celebration like this. Let's have an hour and maybe 15 minutes of semi-serious conversation with our panel members here. To begin with, I'd like to again acknowledge that we are gathered today on the Pura Madagal land where ICS is conducting its work. And I am very thankful for the support that the Daruki Ora Dauramal and the other students have given to Western Sydney University to work on their lands. The panel is being recorded, as you all know, and anyone who does not wish to be recorded when they make any comments or things like that, please let Elise or Sally know. So this panel is going to focus on Western Sydney, really, and the ICS has been very much a true creation of its home in Western Sydney. And like Western Sydney itself, ICS engages with its immediate environment and through that making connections with many different worlds. And this panel will reflect on the social and cultural changes already underway in Western Sydney and how we can think with and beyond Western Sydney to explore the challenges that the region and the world face over the next few decades. And to talk about these issues, we have a very distinguished panel here, and I will introduce each of them first, and I will do that alphabetically. To start with, Indu Balachandran, who has sitting she has over 20 years of experience in innovation and leadership in the indigenous, arts and community development sectors. She's an executive in the for-purpose sector, most recently Director of Strategic Support at the Aboriginal Housing Office in Parramatta. And prior to that, she worked with the National Centre of Indigenous Excellence and Social Ventures Australia. Indu plays the veena, which is an Indian musical instrument, and is a cultural producer. She holds a master in social change leadership, a master's in economics, and is a qualified accountant. She is a committee member of the Australia-India Business Council and a fellow of the Global Atlantic Fellowship for Social Equity. She is co-chair of the Board of Community Resources, which is a national environmental services social enterprise, and she sits on the advisory board of ICS. Then, on the right-hand side here, on the left-hand side, Professor Gawain Bodkin Andrews, who is a Dharawal man who grew up in Didigal and Natai Madagal country, which is referred to today as southwestern Sydney, as I might understand. Gawain completed his undergraduate and PhD degrees here at Western Sydney University, and after working at various other institutions, he has recently come back to Western to take up the position of Director of Indigenous Research, where his role is to develop an Indigenous research agenda and help the university become a leader in Indigenous research. As a scholar, Gawain's research encapsulates and promotes Indigenous standpoints and perspectives across a range of disciplines, and he has led numerous research grants investigating a range of topics including mental health, mentoring, identity, traditional knowledges and storytelling, Indigenous-centered statistics, education, racism, and bullying. And his academic leadership roles have included his membership of the 2018 ERA Research Quality Exercise, the AIC College of Experts, the Steering Committee for the Longitudinal Study of Indigenous Children, and the National Indigenous Researchers and Knowledge Holders Network. Then, very much to the left-hand side for me, right-hand side for you, Dr. Diana O'Donnell, who is a partner with Deloitte's Risk Advisory, Climate and Sustainability team. Before this, she was Director of Future Earth Australia at the Australian Academy of Science in Canberra. She's a qualified lawyer and conducted her PhD here at ICS with research on climate change adaptation and coastal governance. In her work, she focuses on helping governments and other sectors with climate and sustainability-related policies and program transformation. Her areas of expertise include environmental and planning law, climate change adaptation, climate governance, coastal policy, climate and disaster resilience, climate law, and urban and regional sustainability. She has worked on these areas with a range of leaders for about 2 decades now, spanning private, public, academic, and non-profit sectors. She has published on these topics in many formats, and she has a forthcoming book entitled Complex Disasters, Compounding, Cascading, and Protracted, coming out in September. And she's now also a member of the ICS Advisory Board. Then, sitting in the middle is Professor Peter Oleg, who is the Central City District Commissioner with the Greater Cities Commission, which used to be the Greater Sydney Commission, but I think the brief has enlarged for this commission. And the Central City, as you all know, is one of the 3 designated cities of Greater Metropolitan Sydney, with Parramatta as its capital. Peter is also Professor of Practice at Western Sydney University's School of Architecture. He was the 23rd New South Wales Government Architect from 2012 to 2018, and during his tenure as Government Architect, Peter worked to promote good design of the built environment through advocacy, research, consultation, and guidance. This has led to the development of the state's first design policy, Better Placed and Greener Places, and the establishment of the New South Wales Design Review Panel. Peter's aim is to bring resilient quality outcomes to the natural and built environments of metropolitan Sydney, and he advocates using design methods and thinking to connect, engage, and empower communities and make for better, more resilient places. And finally, Amanda Third, who is our one person internal to ICS, and she is the co-director of the Young and Resilient Research Centre. An international expert in user-centered participatory research, her work investigates children's and young people's technology practices. She has led projects to map children's and young people's experiences of the digital age in almost 80 countries, primarily in the global south. She has a wide range of advisory roles, including expert advisor to Global Kids Online and the Australian Federal Government's e-safety advisory. She's an ambassador to the 2168 Children's Parliament in Western Sydney, which is a deliberative democracy initiative run by Mission Australia and Liverpool City Council. And among Amanda's publications are a series of high-impact reports for global agencies, including UNICEF and the Global Partnership to End Violence Against Children. And she recently co-authored a general comment on children's rights in the digital environment for the United Nations Committee for the Rights of the Child. So, a very distinguished and wide-ranging panel. I would very much like to begin by asking each of you, what is your relationship to Western Sydney, personally or professionally? And from your perspective, what is the most interesting or distinctive aspect about Western Sydney as you know it. So who can I give the microphone first? Conveyor, maybe you can start.
Thank you. I'll start by maybe offering a little bit of a clause here, and that's a different perspective of how we can't hear.
Speak louder.
Louder? Okay, I'll speak louder, sorry. I'm just offering a little bit of warning that we need to respect each other's perspectives on what is Western Sydney and country, and the buildings and the architecture and all these wonderful creations. And I was just reminded of this case in point about your grandparents, Sarah, and how they were both psychiatrists here, and how you have a very strong connection to this place. Whereas my mum, who's moving on to 90 years of age now, remembers this place for being removed from her family for a brief period in which she claimed she was able to escape. So we both have a connection to this place, and that connection is, I guess, the antithesis of each other, but at the same time, we have to respect these different viewpoints. And I guess I'm offering that as a warning or maybe a plea for understanding. When I think of Western Sydney, I think of sadness, I think of sorrow. I think of the story my mum told me about the Bala, the eel spirit, and the Bulamili, the shark spirit, who have met on what was known as the Parramatta River, and they came to an agreement of mutual respect where they will protect the river. But I look at what we see today, and I wonder, are they still there in terms of what has happened to this country, what has happened to Goolumba, whether it be Western Sydney, whether it be Southwest Sydney, whether it be the Southern Highlands. Goolumba for me is home country. It's not just Nura, it's not just land, it is home country. It is a place I have a very deep and ancestral connection to. At the same time, I guess, I've got to also be critical of myself, because sometimes I get caught up. Someone's pointing up in the air for some reason.
Trouble hearing you.
Looking again?
You have to wear it like a cricket player.
Oh, it's right here.
High.
Right there?
Yeah, right there.
Oh, this is more like karaoke, man.
Sorry. You know.
Thank you, alright. There we go, that's much better. Thank you, up the back there. I guess my point is when I look at sadness, I look at the meeting I attended last week, a consultation meeting out at about development out at Leppington, and going down to Narellan, so to speak. And there was a lot of Aboriginal elders in this consultation meeting, community members, very strong, very proud. And they were asked, and it was a very respectful team, Indigenous led as well, and they were asked what would they like to see within this area, and they said no more development. And you could see the consultants squirm, because it's already set out, it's already being developed, the plans are in place. I wasn't even quite sure why we were having this meeting, because there is now no going back. But at the same time, we also learned in that meeting that there are secrets that have been uncovered by this development. So let's look at it at a different perspective, another way of viewing something. And there was a discovery apparently a few years ago of some Indigenous ovens for cooking and baking bread. I won't say always was an English thing, but with that being said, I never knew these were located in this particular area where I was living, like literally, as you would measure today, about 10 k's away. And this is country I'm connected to, so the development has uncovered something that was maybe lost, and there maybe are valuable lessons to it. But I guess that's the point of when we think of Western Sydney, when we think of country, when we think of Australia as a whole, we need to think of the many diverse connections. And the point I simply made is these consultants wanted to protect that little bit, that little area where the ovens were found. And I said, well, what was used to cook in the ovens? Was it kangaroo grass or the seeds of kangaroo grass? Was it the wattle seeds? Why not expand this protection, or at least this understanding of country and these connections to country? Why not expand these to not just these artifacts, but the bulgaricum, the wattle, the kangaroo grass, the other plants, the non-human connections to country? Can we expand upon this protection? I guess there's so much more I could talk about here, but I just ask that you understand that I have a sense of sadness, but at the same time there's a sense of wonder as what's next and what can be part of our future, both Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples. And hopefully we can respect each other in the process.
Thank you for that very much. Thank you.
Karaoke, all right. Thank you, and that's a hard act to follow. So my connection with Western Sydney, personally and professionally, I suppose I grew up in Dundas. We moved there when we first moved to Australia 30 years ago, and until recently, it's been the family home. I have worked in Western Sydney for a very long time. I used to work at Information and Cultural, ACE now it's called, Arts and Cultural Exchange down the road, and more recently at the Aboriginal Housing Office. But I suppose, Western Sydney is, I no longer live here, but it's my home in many ways. It's where two of my primary communities, I suppose, is where I belong, is both the South Asian Indian community, of which I'm a part of, and they are part of me, and also because I practice Indian music, it's also where a lot of the cultural work and connections and collaborators I work with are. It's where a lot of my performances are, it's where I make and I suppose see most of my work. So I suppose that's my historical and current connection to Western Sydney. Last year I was offered a place at the Atlantic Fellowship Program, which is a global program, but in Australia it's run out of Melbourne University and it centres Indigenous knowledges. And the work I offered to do or wanted to do through the fellowship was really, I went into it thinking about how the Indian diaspora can be more connected to Aboriginal place. It took me 30 years really to come into an awareness of that, and so really I started with that, and I finished the year after a lot of thinking and help and reading and conversations with my Aboriginal Maori colleagues, that really what I was interested to do was to transform immigration as an act of lawful relationality, I suppose, to Aboriginal people. Starting with the South Asian community. So my work is in community on the ground, and how to do that in a civic place. And coming to your second question, I suppose, what is that special thing about Western Sydney? I think it's a place where, and I suppose in some ways following on from Gawain, is that how you say your name? Okay. I think it's a place for fertile conversations on belonging. It's constantly forming, it's full of very, very rich and different perspectives. But also I was reminded last year that you begin with a place, and I moved to Australia onto Darug lands. My children were born on Darug lands, and as an Aboriginal colleague gently said to me a few weeks ago, she said, well, it means that they're of Darug country. And for me that was, well, I don't know why I've got Borkum Hills on their birth certificate, but it would make so much more sense to have the country on which they were born, because there's a meaning to it. The passport when I go overseas doesn't even say Sydney. People, where's Borkum Hills? Like, well, I don't know. So it's so meaningless. So I think for me that's the work that I'm going to be doing for the next, well, probably lifetime actually, but it's centred in Western Sydney for all the reasons I just mentioned.
Thank you.
This is, we are doing it in line. Sorry. I was born to immigrant parents on the floor of Wentworthville Hospital by accident almost. They were brought here as recent arrivals, and we spent our early years here. So I'm connected to this place quite literally. And I went to school here and have studied here, and now I work part-time here. But I also represent here back into the powers of government in Macquarie Street. I feel like I've been narrow cast in the introduction. I'm actually a generalist. I'm less an architect than I ever was. And I think that's important to note, because my fundamental reason for operating in the environments that I operate in is to ensure that the poetic, the creative, the genuine, the real voice is heard in those boardrooms, in those decision-making places, where currently it is not there. And so I would like to hear the poetry in the boardroom. I would like to see the poetry in our cities. I would like to have the real life, the energy of the people that inhabit these places exhibited in how we organise ourselves, both physically and in a society-wide manner. These are aspirations that are ongoing and I think shared by many, because many voices aren't heard and many decisions are made in ignorance, not in malice, but that is still abroad as well, I'd hate to say. And so our place could be much better if the right people were heard and the right people were listened to make the decisions, not preserve the ovens in aspic and forget about why they were there. This happens across cultures everywhere, and it's not good enough any longer. Design is a tool, is a mechanism of engagement that I was taught as an architect, which is useful because it is an engagement tool. It is a method of eliciting conversation, which I think is worth noting. So the creative arts, creative pursuits need to be heard and represented. Yes.
It's on.
It's on.
You can't really hear it, can you?
No.
It's very strange. So it's a great honour to sit on this panel with such esteemed colleagues. Thank you. And I just want to pay my respects quickly to the traditional owners of this land, elders past, present and emerging. I'm a relative newcomer to Western Sydney as compared to the other people on this panel so far. My primary reason for being in Western Sydney, actually, it was at first a very much a professional one. I did have a family connection to Western Sydney in that my grandfather grew up in a farm in Blacktown, and my father grew up in Campsie. So my sort of first sense of Western Sydney, if you like, was animated through his stories of riding his bike through the stormwater canal system in order to get from one suburb to another, and throwing the chocos on the vine in the backyard over the fence to the neighbour's chicken to avoid having to eat them for dinner. But that was really the extent of what I knew about Western Sydney until really I landed here. I mean, I did have an emerging sense that Western Sydney was a place that was swaying federal elections. I knew it was a vibrant and diverse community. And I think also just to acknowledge the note on which Ryan started this conversation, I had a sense that it was a very contested place and still do have that very strong sense. But I think so on the one hand I came here because my partner had a job here, and thanks to Wayne McKenna, a job was advertised that I could apply for, which meant that I won the bet that we had made about who would move where. Like we had this bet basically that whoever got a job in the other one's town first would win the bet. I won that one. But also I had read the likes of Understanding Everyday Life, Watching Dallas, and Children and Television. And I was very excited to come to Western Sydney University because of those, the authors of those books were here, and I was reliably informed by the baby boomers in my orbit at that point in time that CCR, as it was then known, would be a really great place to be. So I was very excited about coming here. And I think one of the things that, as you've heard this evening so far, is that there's a very strong mandate here at the university to engage with the community. And this is something I've heard from the moment I arrived, and I continue to hear it very strongly. But I think we all are still learning what it means to engage with community, how to do that well, ethically, especially when many of us haven't grown up here in Western Sydney. So how do you mobilise effectively with those communities, and how can the university be a platform that supports the causes of the community and so on. So those are still very much questions that we're working through. And I think, obviously, Western Sydney as a construct is constantly evolving. I think already some of the people on the panel here have pointed to the fact that there's massive change underfoot in this part of the country, and we don't see any sign that is slowing up. But I guess for me, really, the primary lens through which I've come to know and to love and to feel very much, connected with Western Sydney is through my work with children and young people in the Young and Resilient Research Centre, which sits in ICS. Children in this part of the world have really brought Western Sydney to life in all its complexity for me. And even this morning, I was really lucky enough to sit through a sitting of the 2168 Children's Parliament, and I want to just acknowledge Shaista Haidari, who's in the audience tonight and coordinates that amazing deliberative democracy initiative. And I was reminded just how incredible children are, but actually how incredible children in Western Sydney are. They come together twice a year to present their views and their ideas and research that they have done. So Shaista is nurturing small researchers that we hope some of them will make their way into the Institute eventually. But they present this to a range of ambassadors who are in a power to enact change, and then those ambassadors are tasked with making that change before we meet again in the second half of the year. So it's a really lovely process where children are heard and adults are held accountable for change in children's lives. And I think I was reminded of four things this morning that they've taught me. The first is to listen carefully. Through the research that they've conducted, they've really emulated the very best kind of listening. They go out and they talk to their peers and they survey them and they talk, and then they debate what they've heard. I think also when they call for change, they don't just criticise, they assert solutions, and those solutions, they think big, and I think that's a really important thing for us to remember. Today it was wonderful to hear one young woman, an 11-year-old, let me say, stand up and say it's outrageous that it costs so much to participate in sports, in organised sports in this country, and this needs to change. And that language, the demand for change, right? The call, the speaking out. She was very much aware of her right to contribute to the decision making that impacts her lives. And last of all, the need to work together. I think they expressed again this morning how they want to work with adults to see that change, and are really ready to be part of a big solution. I think that's very true, actually, of many of the communities in Western Sydney that certainly that I've had the pleasure of engaging in. So I think to finish, if ICS has been a success, it is in no small part due to the vibrancy and the commitments of the communities in which it's embedded, and I look forward to seeing what we can do next together.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, it's
what is this jar? When I think about Western Sydney, I think about our stories that bind us, and I think about edges, hard and soft edges, and I think about privilege, which wasn't where I was going to go with this, but that's listening to this panel and where we've ended up. I'm going to share a little bit of my story. I was born in a place called Vimeo, which is maybe halfway up the Blue Mountains, and I lived there for about 7 years. I was born to a single parent. She was 17 at the time. She was a migrant. I think I'm lucky to have stayed with her, given that I was born in 1980. We moved to a place called Cranebrook when I was maybe 6 or 7. Housing commission area in the real western suburbs of Sydney, not Marrickville or those fancy inner west suburbs, but the real west, much like the southwest is thought of by us there. And that's where I spent my formative years, exploring stormwater, drain pipes, coming of age, helping my mother who struggled a lot, helping my siblings, and really learning what it meant to think about hard and soft edges in people, our environments, and how to navigate that. And what that bred in me was an enormous drive to move out of poverty. And I'm not sure I would have achieved what I've achieved in my life. Some might call it success, I'm not sure, it depends on your measure. But I certainly wouldn't have been able to achieve it without having come to this university. And it was a choice I made deliberately. By the time I made it here, I was 19, also a single parent with a daughter who is 23 and not followed the same path, which was wonderful for her. But I was here as a single parent in law school. I did a law and social science degree at Western Sydney. And I could have gone to any university. I could have gone to a Sandstone University. Folks who were lawyers, mainly in legal aid, said go to a Sandstone University. That's how you get ahead in life. And I decided not to. I decided to come to Western Sydney University because I liked its edges. And I knew that I was enormously privileged to be able to go to university in the first place. And so with that drive to succeed and to pull my people and the community along on that ride was a commitment to home, a commitment to where we live and what that means in terms of how we build community, how we share our stories, how our stories, even if they're vastly different, connect us. And that's served me well over the past 20 years in my career. There are people who you will work with who you might take for granted, and I'm reflecting on Terry's comments in particular earlier. People who may play a small role 20 years in your past or 20 years in your future, but who in fact are an important part of your circle, even if they did play a small part. They may come back and play a big part. And that connectedness and that drive that this university gives the community here is something that makes it more than a university. I don't know what the right descriptor is, but Western Sydney is more than a university, and indeed Western Sydney as a geography is more than a geography or just a place. It's something else, it's something special. So that's mine. Very unscripted contribution reflecting on the panel. Thank you.
So what I will do is I will ask one question to each of you first, and then we will open up. Okay? So, but we will now start the other way around. So we'll start with Diana.
Draw breath quickly.
So Diana, thank you for sharing your personal story and links to Western Sydney. So your work has really focused very much on one of the existential challenges that we have in our time, which is climate change. And as we all know, Western Sydney is a region which is already experiencing some of the damaging impacts of climate change. So, we can think of the recent floods as well as the unprecedented heat experienced by a place like Penrith, for example. Can you tell us a little bit about how you see the impact of climate change in Western Sydney? And perhaps you can say something about some of the resources of hope we can have in this very challenging period. Resources of hope that we can draw on to move forward.
Thank you, especially for the nudge on hope, because I could have gone to a very dark place. Look, I have to give credit to the ICS. I'm a very mischievous scholar. One of my PhD supervisors is in the front and is nodding internally vigorously, because when I came here to do my PhD, I was very determined that it was going to be an interdisciplinary PhD. In the end, I landed in legal geography, which some might argue is interdisciplinary in and of itself. But the PhD really was law and human geography, if we strip it back to its disciplinary bones, even though I resist that. And I was nurtured to do that. And what that nurturing did, and it took some time, but what it did was it opened up an enormous range of work that I've been able to build out with other people in collaboration over a sustained period of time. And there's a number of elements to that that are important, I suppose, but the climate adaptation story is at its heart a story of resilience, and is at its heart a story of how we connect in a more meaningful way with our world around us. It's more than an acknowledgement of the tipping points that have already been reached. It's more than an institutional understanding of what levers we pull at which point in time to, preface the latest market mechanism. And I say that knowing, with my Deloitte hat on, I'm here as Deloitte, and we work with a range of clients, and it's an active discussion even with those clients as a consultant, where we know our economic paradigms are going to shift dramatically, and that is because we know we have to adapt to a changing climate, and in adapting we have to centre resilience, and we have to completely reorient our relationship with the environment, and everything else flows from that. And that is a substantial shift for people whose mindset in the past has been, we don't even know what climate change is, nor do we care because it's not really going to impact us in our lifetime. What has happened is that the pace and rate of scale of climate impacts has sped up so quickly and has cascaded so rapidly that we have no choice. So what does that mean for Western Sydney? Unfortunately, past planning decisions have meant that we've built a lot of suburbs with no trees, black roofs, minimal water security, minimal food system security, so we're importing foods in from vast distances, and a lot of it's in floodplains. So a lot of people are in a lot of trouble. If we take that to its logical conclusion, in my view, that's a serious conversation around managed retreat. It's my bias that I would say that. That is an area that I'm deeply interested in. What does that mean in practice? If we're going to ask people from Richmond right through to Penrith, including the development corridors that are planned there, to pack up and move somewhere else, we don't know where, maybe further up the mountain and where it's higher ground, that is a massive transformative shift. And our imaginations aren't quite there yet, but if you take that idea and transpose it to Lismore, who are actively having that conversation now around where they rebuild that town, with pressure from the various funding agencies that are trying to support that, you can see that there is potential for Western Sydney to completely transform in the same way. I don't know how that's going to unfold. I think we have to care for each other as that unfolds. There will be trade-offs, and we shouldn't shy away from saying that there will be trade-offs. I know that's not very hopeful, but it's important to say that and to be really clear-eyed about what our future looks like in this place that we are all deeply connected to in various ways.
Thanks for that. I don't think we need to clap now, later. Right. We will return to some of these. Sorry. Amanda.
Do we have to go in a line? It's making me feel awkward. We're going in a line again?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
All right. Yeah, so I'd like to ask you, Amanda, you have done research and worked with children and young people around the world, you say like in 80 countries, including the Pacific, Southeast Asia, and the Middle East. So, you've done this work for UNICEF and other organizations. And I would be very interested to hear from you how you see the connection of that work, that global perspective on young people's lives and children's lives in this period of time, with the Institute space here in Western Sydney. How can you see the connection here between kind of a local base and a global perspective? How can they be mutually enriching in some ways?
Yeah, it's a great question, Ian. Thank you. And I think we have done a lot of work internationally with, I guess, children living in very, very diverse circumstances around the world. And just to be clear, in case someone thinks that I've been clocking up terrible environmental, climate change, I'm one of the sole causes of climate change because I get on aeroplanes to go and work in 70 countries. I want to be clear that the model that we use is about engaging with child-facing organisations in those locations, and then working with them to decide how to best consult with children about the topics that they are concerned about. So it's very much what we would call a distributed model. And the beauty of working like that, Ian, I guess, is that on the one hand we're constantly learning from children about their perspectives in those different settings and so on. But you can imagine there's a whole lot of sort of, I guess, cultural adaptation or cultural translation work that goes on in operationalising a research model like that. So we're always also very closely working with partners in country to help us make sense of what children are saying, and we have a sort of a co-analysis process set up and so on to support that. And it's by no means a perfect process, and we're always learning. But I think what happens in that scenario is that we end up with this incredible wisdom from a very wide variety of places, and then the aim of this research is to channel that wisdom directly into international policy and programming for children and the networks that support them. And what's always really fascinating to me is watching how the very specific and the very particular things that children choose to share with us in those encounters, in workshops, basically in creative and qualitative workshops that we run with them, or the partner organisations run in partnership with us. Gosh, it's a bit complicated, isn't it? But anyway, what we learned there, the very specific things kind of get abstracted up into these principles about how we're going to change the world for the better of children as a sort of an abstract category. And so I think for me it's always very important to always simultaneously be trying to do a project that's grounded and here in Western Sydney to kind of keep that inevitable dialogue between the local and the global alive and present in the work that's at the international level. So I think Western Sydney really exercises a very strong pull on the ways that we interpret and make sense of things, and keeps the work as real as possible. But I think too, what's been really interesting to me is to watch how actually more and more the children and young people that we engage with here in Western Sydney are really thinking about these global challenges. And I think there's a whole series of questions about what it means for a child to be growing up in an era which is characterised by, dare we say it, a lack of hope, or at least massively diminished horizons, right? I think those are a set of very serious questions that we've got to really sort of think through carefully with children and young people. But I'm also struck by the ways that children take hold of these big challenges. They see how they can take action in their local circumstances, but increasingly they also understand themselves as connected to a global constituency of children. And I think here, this is where I sort of think there's a lot for us to think about in the ways that children are picking up technology and using it. If we go back to our kind of classic cultural studies theory, like going back to Anderson's idea of the imagined community, you know, that moment where he talks about the importance of the newspaper, that oft-cited moment where he talks about how the newspaper was so vital to imagining the nation. Well, I'm not going to say that that's a great thing, because obviously the nation's a really problematic construct, but if we take that principle and we say, well, what does it mean for children to have in their hands a technology that can potentially, it doesn't automatically, but potentially connect them to children on the other side of the planet? Well, for the first moment in history, actually, it's possible for children to think of themselves as part of a global political constituency that has power to change things. And we are seeing them take up that potential in the Fridays for the Future movement and so on. So I think there's, you know, like, basically, to summarise, Ian, you know, Western Sydney is both a kind of a check and balance on a lot of that work that we do, but also a really key source of inspiration for the work going forward.
Thank you. Peter.
Why am I not surprised?
No, I'll ask you the question. So, Peter, so you are the Central City Commissioner.
Yes.
And obviously, therefore, you're in the thick of all the urban development happening in Parramatta and its surroundings right now. And there are lots of challenges as well as promises in relation to that, I suppose. What I was interested in was that you actually kind of said in your earlier what you earlier said was the importance of creativity and cultural production, which in some ways I think is sometimes the poor cousin when urban development is thought about, right? So I just wonder, I asked you this many months ago, actually, once, kind of like, when people talk about infrastructure, it's mostly transport. But it's absolutely crucial that in this urban development, there are social infrastructures in need, and as well as cultural infrastructures. How do you see the possibilities of providing more emphasis on cultural infrastructure in kind of, like, you know, this? Otherwise, it would really become an urban wasteland with very soulless places.
I'll be optimistic. I think what we've built to date is not particularly good and not particularly of place or of people, and so we should do better at that. And forget government trying to do it for you. I think we need to work from the grassroots. We need to mobilise, empower, particularly the next generations, and particularly our Indigenous brothers and sisters, to make a difference, to make this place different to everywhere else, to actually express who we are in a meaningful way, as opposed to an old school way or a imported way. What that means is turning the political paradigm upside down and demanding, as our younger people have been doing, change. We've got institutions that are so old that they are not fit for purpose. How do we change that? And we only do so by empowering the next generation. We are the people that are charged with making those major differences, from moving people out of the flood zone and bushfire risk in a humane way, to actually planning how they reorganise and regroup to become more empowered, more meaningful, and express themselves in a beautiful way, and in a way that will give them pride and enrich their lives. Forget about all that other rubbish about the GDP and all that. Let's actually make a difference for the people that we live amongst. That message is difficult to get across in the forums in which I operate. That's my subversive act, and I'm often seen as the odd person out in the room. But I use the analogy of the poet. Where is the poet in this room? Where is the poetry in this decision? Oh, please, I need allies. It's getting tiring. I'm feeling very lonely. And yet, if you appeal to the instinctual human nature of some of those that do make those decisions, there's a kernel there, there's a spark there. I'm choking up. So I do have hope. You have to have hope because I've got children. I've got grandchildren. We have to make it better for them.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Indu.
No, I have some liquid refreshment, please.
Indu, you are, as you've already told us, that you are deeply engaged with the South Asian diaspora. And your own background obviously makes it that you are strongly connected to, the cultural diversity that is brought by migrant communities here in Western Sydney, but Australia more broadly. At the same time, you have really also been very, for a long period of time already, committed to working with Aboriginal communities, Indigenous communities. So in that way, you have actively worked to bridge the multicultural and the Indigenous, multicultural Australia and Indigenous Australia, which I think is a really kind of inspiring thing to do. Can you tell us a bit about what we can learn by bringing these two worlds into encounter?
Well, that's a big question. Look, I think what, for me, it's been very much about getting, it's personal. And for me, it's the best frame from which, this word scale is really, worries me. I work in social enterprise, everyone's talking about scale. But it really doesn't have meaning sometimes it does. And so the work, this work is life's work, I suppose I call it. And it's very personal, and I think maybe it'll be more helpful if I share a few stories from a few moments in my journey. The point in time when I realized how important it was to articulate my place was actually through my music, which I tell my children all the time, you've got to make music. I mean, this is the thing, I'm going to count, I say I'm going to count. My mother is a physicist, and she's a musician, and she wears a sari all the time, and I remember she used to teach at St Union. She'd say a lot of her students' favourite question was, how can you be a physicist, and do you believe in God? And she has, she believes in some kind of divine power, and I'm a trained accountant, but that's just what I do. It's not who I am. I'm also a social change activist, and I'm a musician, and these are all things I do. This is not who I am. But the moment in time, actually, that there was kind of an epiphany is when I started to make work in Australia, which was quite late in life. It was in my 30s. In the Indian tradition, you kind of hone your art for about 40 years, and then you start to improvise, and then you get better at making music. And I figured I'd honed enough when I was in my 30s, and I started to actually make work. And when I started to make work, I had children, and I thought, well, most of the music that I've grown up with speaks of mythology, place, temples, stories of, our history, stories of gods, goddesses, moments in time. So I was thinking, when I make music here, what am I leaving for my children and for the community? And, it was at that point that I thought, I live in Aboriginal land, I cannot possibly make work that doesn't speak to that reality. And it was actually at that was the first point when I thought, I need to own this in some way. So I think that was and I think this is why the kind of practice of culture is really important, not just the taking in of it, to take it in and make something of it in layperson's language. I think the other story I'd like to share is I sit on the committee of Australia India Business Council, which is, a whole lot of businesses in Australia that have connectivity to India. And, not known for their work in engaging with First Nations, or anything really. But there was an openness to it, and they asked me to host an event on Australia Day. And I just thought, oh my God, this is very, very complicated, and we are the audience is very mixed. The kind of awareness of anything to do with this topic is really kind of mixed. How am I going to hold this space? But I think the one thing I learned from the fellowship last week is to just go there. And so we engaged. We called up the First Nations businesses we had in our community. And we put a program together, and what was really, I don't know if you know, some of you would know, but Australia Day, Survival Day, Invasion Day falls on the same, basically go through junk that people are throwing away and make sure that as much of it is diverted from landfill as possible, right? So this is labour intensive work, but what's really hopeful for me is that we're in this point in time where my co-chair and I, as leaders of this incredible organisation, we have to grow it. We have to grow it because it's important for the land. We have to grow it because it gives people employment, and that's very, very critical. People who wouldn't have jobs. But the beautiful thing is, I think we've slowly reminded the organisation of our roots. And I'm really proud to be working with this organisation to really return the organisation to Aboriginal control, which it's moved away from. So I think, for me, I always say it's personal, but there are ways of doing this work that are real. And so yeah, that's
Thank you.
my reflection.
Good. Right, so now, Gawaiian. So yes, obviously Western Sydney is home to many Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. I think very large community First Nations people in Western Sydney. And there is of course still a lot of disadvantage due to colonial history and colonial oppression. But there is also huge progress in the sense that I think we see much more Indigenous empowerment and strength gaining some traction. And one of that is what you work on yourself is advocating for the articulation of Indigenous standpoints in production of knowledge, which is crucial for you. And I would very much like to hear from you how adopting and promoting Aboriginal knowledge perspectives can help us all to better respond to some of the shared challenges that we all face, such as climate change.
Good question, thank you.
That's huge. No. But
I was probably going to get distracted here. I was motivated by the fellow panelists here, and I was just thinking from my standpoint, from the lessons that have been passed on to me, how we have stories that are pretty much related to what everyone said here. And that's maybe where I'm coming from in terms of Indigenous standpoints, in terms of our wisdoms, our knowledges, our connections to country, our sustainable ways, our respect for all entities on country, not just other human beings, but all entities, whether they be animals, whether they be flora, whether they be insects, you name it. It is all country to us. And one thing that immediately struck me in terms of the first discussion when we're talking, when the focus was on climate change and the impact of climate change. As Aboriginal people, what perspective can we offer to climate change? Well, we have our stories. We have the stories of the sea. There's a coastal story of the sea levels rising. We have stories of great fires, the Rajuraban story. We have stories of extinction of fish within a particular river, a very sacred place, due to Aboriginal human waste. So we have stories of waste. We have stories of the misuse of knowledge, the Barragarang, where we didn't make use of all of the components of country, and therefore we left waste behind, and then this waste then became something that was just absolutely ferocious and wrong. We have the story of Talara Tingi, my daughter's name, but a story of the flannel flower, which speaks of a young child who was born in a time when the children had never seen the sun. Never seen the sun. And we had forgotten our ways. We had forgotten our ways, we had forgotten the respect, maybe think in terms of spirituality here, but the lessons of spirituality. We forgot the lessons of our Creator Spirit. We forgot the lessons of our ancestors. We forgot how to look after country. We forgot how to care for country. And it wasn't until this young girl who remembered, her name was Tiana, by the way, the brightest star, who remembered that we have to look after country, that the sun came back and the children saw the sun again. And these are all stories. These are all myths and legends or fables, if you want to think of that, but they are also Indigenous perspectives. And we need to listen to these stories. Not only the stories of Aboriginal and Torres Strait people, but the stories of country itself. What is country trying to teach us today? And yes, we may be able to adapt to climate change, but are we learning the lessons from climate change? And that's where I personally feel, and pardon my own bias, but I think Aboriginal standpoints, whether it be Dharawal, Yuin, Gundung River, Eora, you name it. I think we have a lot to learn there. We just need to listen.
I think that's a very important message. Thank you, all of you, for your thoughtful reflections. I think I would now like to kind of have maybe 15 minutes of question and answer from you. So, is there anyone who would like to ask a question or make a comment? Oh, yeah. So Diana has to leave in 5 minutes, but
To get on
anyway,
my-
so is there any?
to contribute to the mission.
Please.
No questions following that.
This is ICS.
Can I just say something? Sorry, and this is, I couldn't figure out how to weave this in, but we need humility here as well. And I forget myself so often, it's not funny. And just the other week I caught myself in my front yard on the lawn hunting for four-leaf clovers. And I was having fun. I was really enjoying it. I was like a little child again, weeding, if you can believe that. And I refused to use chemicals and so forth to get rid of this clover. So I was getting my fingernails dirty, which my wife always says I need to cut. And that's beside the point, sorry. Anyway, and I'm digging away and I'm pulling these clovers out by the roots, and I think, like, this is me fighting colonisation. I'm a warrior here. And here I was, standing up, quite proud of myself, brushing myself off, looking down at the Sir Walter buffalo grass. And what was I doing there but getting caught up in a particular narrative where I'd forgotten what was underneath these layers of, call it colonisation, call it invasive weeds or whatever, but there are stories underneath there that can be forgotten if we forget about the current, or not if we forget about, if we focus only on what is now. And maybe that's what we need to think. We need to learn from our past, we need to think from the future. Sorry, it's just a little I would hope a humble tale there where I forgot, I get caught up in it. But
I've been using our
Just take a step back.
lawn for salad.
Oh, there we go. Exactly. My mum always talks about the, what do you call it, the, that yellow flower weed that everyone hates.
Dandelion.
Dandelion. So yeah, you get it mixed up with the fireweed, which is a toxic
Yeah, don't do
invasive
that.
species. But the dandelion, some would say it's not native to Australia, but there is a variants that are.
Yeah.
And it's
The leaves are
like,
great.
the leaves
Yep.
are absolutely
Yeah.
phenomenal. So yeah,
The
love
bees
it.
like the flowers. They do.
Native bees especially.
And lettuce
Here
is
we go.
$11 in Woolworths.
Think about this one. I was so proud last year about the native bees. They actually came
Yep.
to my backyard. I was so excited. It was a beautiful bee, big fella, blue stripes. I even got a
blue-banded bee.
photo. There we go. Don't know his name, sorry.
That's what it is. It's a blue
Nigel.
banded bee.
There we go. And I was so excited, but you know what I was loving? The rosemary. Right away from my grevilleas and my banksias and all that stuff, I absolutely love the rosemary. So,
On the flip side, I keep European honeybees, and I'm always very conflicted in doing so. But they love the gums at the moment. I was just saying, I keep European honeybees, which is a conflicting thing to do. But they are loving the red gums. They ignore the weeds, love the red gums.
There you go.
Our
There is
systems
hope.
are complex and complicated, I think is the moral.
There's two
I think
questions.
David has a question.
Just a quick one, so I don't want to take a very good question. When I first thought about Western Sydney, sort of coming here, I was thinking of the kind of images, metaphors, and so on for the place. There was, of course, the figure of the Westie, a stigmatised person, and I think we've seen that. And then there was another kind of metaphor, which was that of the laboratory, the living laboratory, the idea that, as social scientists, we had to somehow inspect Western Sydney as seeking science of the future. If you had a metaphor or image for Western Sydney, what would it be?
Well, that's something for everyone.
Yeah, I'm going to quickly answer that and then slide out the door, sadly. I still think it's the edges, and I think it's the hard and soft edges. Sometimes it's privilege, it's the humility, it's the stories. It's not just the built environment around us that form those edges, and they're very enriching.
Western Sydney is kind of like, very much in the thrall of development. I mean, this is kind of like, when you go to Parramatta today, it's absolutely completely transformed compared to what it was 10 years ago or 30 years ago. And so, development is central to what the image of Western Sydney is at the moment. I think in that context, the thought about love of country, preservation and restoration are really important perspectives that we need to keep in mind while the development is all happening, because it is precisely by trying to kind of think about how these different realities can somehow be balanced out.
Not to have the last word, but I will.
Again, you have the last word?
No, I don't have to have the last
No,
word, but
yeah.
I think we need to make that development in our own image, as opposed to somebody else's preconceived parameters. And that image is something we're developing here by talking about understanding the place better and the people better.
Yeah. I think you couldn't have said it, I couldn't have said it better than you.
Oh, yes.
So thank you so much. Thank you for...
Thank you for running an excellent panel. It was really, really good.